My name is Tony Eisner. I brought in a brown Bess Musket that's marked to the British East India Company, and it's a third model East India pattern brown Bess.
The long land pattern musket, which made its battlefield debut in 1722, served as the British Army's standard firearm for over a century and was a dominating force across numerous historical conflicts, including the American War of Independence and the Napoleonic Wars. Nicknamed the Brown Bess, the flintlock model was the first of its kind issued according to uniform specifications required by the British military. The goal was to eliminate logistical problems that arose from the presence of privately purchased weapons held by soldiers and officers on the battlefield. For its role in revolutionizing military logistics throughout its tenure, the Brown Bess musket remains one of history's most famous and recognizable early modern weapons.
Well, I'd like to welcome Tony Eisner here to the program. And Tony, you've brought in quite a musket this morning. I was wondering if you could tell us how you acquired it and what you know about it right now at this point.
Sure. I've been collecting old arms probably for 35 or 40 years. This one I picked up 30 years ago, and I can remember quite well the date because I was graduating from Acadia School of Education, and I was out doing my practice teaching, and my principal was a big collector of all things British. I was after a brown Bess musket and hadn't been able to find one. He mentioned that he was downsizing his collection and that I could come over to his house and pick out a brown Bess. Now, he had gotten them. It had been a hobby that he had been into with his father. And what they did in the summertime was they drove around and they buy ones that were sometimes only a couple of pieces there, sometimes complete, but hadn't been cleaned up in a while. And then in the wintertime, they would restore them. This was one of those.
Now, we've had a minute to kind of have a look at this and kind of do a little bit of diagnosis. This is not like a traditional sort of brown acquired musket. So this might actually be an as-made, so to speak.
One never knows.
No one never knows. Again, so you might have a stock that is a third pattern related to a Nova Scotia militia company, and then again, they've kind of built potentially an East Indian musket. So Tony, now you're a teacher and teach social studies and history. What's your sort of experience or knowledge of the East India Company?
I know that it was started in the 1600s, and the fortunes were made in England off the proceeds from the company. At one point, they had an army that was 3 times the size of the British regular army. I know in terms of the history of the musket, or what the musket looks like on the outside, I guess that it is, that during the Napoleonic Wars that the British government did sequester, I guess, the Crown did get a number of muskets from the company to use for the regular army. And I also noted that the company changed hands from being a company to being a Crown company, I guess, in the 1840s.
You're right. They get their charter in 1600, and they're in Bengal, Madras, and Calcutta. And as their power and influence grows, they raise bodies of troops to protect their holdings in those 3 cities. And so as time goes on, you're right. I think at one point they have an army of 240,000 men. These guys are trained as infantrymen, as cavalry, and as field artillerists. So yeah, the East India Company has an enormous army, and they wage war in the subcontinent of India and completely disrupt the sort of natural order of things in what we now know as the nation of India. So with that, they're involved in everything: the indigo trade, textiles, spices, opium, and of course, slavery. The East India Company, many of the sort of problems of the world today have a direct sort of connection or can be traced back to the British East India Company. They are the original, again, robber barons of the West, setting up their own sort of cartel, if you would, in the Far East. And again, this will have an enormous effect again when they have their interest spill over into China and they get into the tea trade. It's after the Indian Mutiny in the 1850s that you'll start to see the British East India Companies finally dissolved. And this is when you see the rise of the Raj. Again, and the sepoy troops that take part in the Indian Mutiny. Many of them, of course, are soldiers in the East Indian Company. A lot of British officers in times of relative peace in the continent of Europe, many of them will go out and they'll find military service working for, as they call it, the company. Perhaps one of the most famous of those is Sir Richard Burton, who will become like an enormous sort of influence on, almost like a British one-man intelligence service in that part of the world. Interesting enough, too, Sir Richard Burton is like one of the great authorities on swords and edged weapon. Enormous collection of that. And Sir Richard actually spends a few days in Halifax at one point in, I think it's 1860. So, yeah, all these things, everything flows in and out of Halifax Harbor. So we even have a connection to that. This is an exceptionally interesting musket. And again, thank you so much for bringing it in. Yeah, and I encourage people to read about the East India Company, as I'm sure you do as well.
Well, what's always interested me in how they start, and they gradually move upward. They sort of say, well, we're here, but we need a bit of a buffer zone between us, so we'll take these three places, or we'll turn these three princes to our side. And then once they have those three places, then they'll say, well, we still need a little bit of a buffer zone, so we'll take the next 3 or 4. And they gradually eat through all of India that way. Yeah.
And again, so many of the world's problems have their basis in the actions of the East Indian Company. So we're still dealing with the long fallout and the long echo of them. Yeah. Well, Tony, I'd like to really thank you for bringing this piece into Militaria and sharing it with us here and for everybody who's watching at home. What are your plans for this in the future as time goes on for this piece?
I don't know. It's been with me longer than many of my other ones, and where it is non-restricted and antique, I could very well just pass it on to one of my children who may put it above their fireplace or something like that. I don't know. Hadn't really thought about it, and I thought after I'd dispensed with the rest of my collection, this would probably be one that I'd hold on to, just because it was early in my collecting and it has more sentimental value maybe than some of the others.
Well, Tony, I'd like to thank you for bringing this piece on and sharing it with us. And it's been very nice to meet you. And thanks for coming on the program.
Nice to meet you as well, Kevin. And I'm going to get over to the museum at some point.
Oh, by all means, we're glad to see you.
Bring my class.
Okay, yes. Oh, it's really interesting. Very interesting. Tony has great taste in regard to his acquisitions in his private collection. Again, it's quite rare to see anything with the British East India Company markings in this part of the world. They're generally seen that maybe in Western Canada, something made its way back from the East. But yeah, it was really remarkable to see that.